Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk to you about the first essay that you're going to be completing this week. So, your first essay is going to be a formalist analysis of a short story. Formal analysis, if you remember that from our critical reading strategies PowerPoint, it really is just that more traditional way of analyzing stories that you have probably learned about in school, focusing on different literary elements, literary techniques that are used by an author, and how those particular techniques are help to develop a theme over the course of the story. So, under Module 1, Week 4 is where all of your essay information is posted. The first link here, the first item here is the actual essay topic, followed by some sample thesis statement templates. Then we have the essay Dropbox. Because you are writing about theme, many people sometimes have a difficult time coming up with appropriate words for their themes. So I have two links here that may help you in generating ideas. And then I also have here a list of the literary techniques that I compiled from the chapters that you are supposed to read in weeks 1 through 3. So let's jump into talking about the essay. I have the essay topic open down here. So, for your first essay, you will be analyzing 3 short stories. So, you will need to choose 3 stories, and you're going to choose 1 literary element and 1 thematic topic that would be related to all 3 stories. So, typically, I tell students that probably the best place to start is with which 3 stories do you feel like that you understood the best out of all of them. So if you remember the story of an hour, this was Mrs. Louise Mallard, who believed that her husband had passed away, and she realized that she had this newfound freedom. And when she goes downstairs, kind of in a celebratory manner, she realizes that her husband is not passed away, and she, ironically, is the one who ends up dying of heart disease, as the doctors characterized it. With Once, we have an unnamed narrator in that particular story. She goes to the library to return library books that she's had for 18 years and unexpectedly runs into her ex-husband, and they have kind of a sharp conversation where he essentially says that their divorce is all her fault because she did this and that, and that also that she just never really wanted anything. And she says she doesn't tell him that he is wrong outright. He said that he always wanted a boat, and he's going to get his boat, and that he has put a down payment on his boat. And she thinks to herself after he's gone how she did want things. She wanted to be a better person. She wanted to be the kind of person who could make change in the world and bring library books back on time, and that her day on that day was just one step in that right direction. Volar, if you remember, this is a story about a young girl who wished that she could fly. She wished that she was like a superhero and could fly wherever she wanted. And it seems sort of naive, her dream, her desire. But at the very end of the story, we get a little glimpse into the life of her parents, where they're sitting at the breakfast table. The father is, and the mother's looking out the window and saying that she wishes that she could go and see her family in Puerto Rico. And the father says it's just not possible. And that's where, at the very end of the story, the mother expresses her own desire that she wishes she could fly. And so then we find out very suddenly that the young girl's desire to fly has a much more mature root than what we had initially perceived. And The Hitman is a story that is told chronologically, and it uses the subheadings to kind of give each little bit a title. And it's a boy who starts wearing an executioner's hood. And when trouble starts in school as a result of it, he kills a kid over it, but kind of gets out. And then he ends up going on and he kills his dad, and he ends up killing other people, a waitress, because she put peas on his plate. But eventually he becomes kind of a family man. And then at the end of the story, then he has a son, which is kind of the turning point for him in his life. And now he has sort of a larger mission. One of the first things that he does is puts a gun in the hand of his infant son and And then at the end of the story, when he's on his deathbed, his son is out buying his very first executioner's hood. So we get that idea that this is becoming a cycle, that his ending is only the beginning of this life for his son. A Rose for Emily is not told chronologically. The story is told out of order to help get that shock effect at the end of it. A Rose for Emily is about Emily Grierson, and she grew up in a little small town in the South. And when she was young, her family was wealthy, and her dad was really strict and wouldn't let her go out with anybody and do anything. Nobody was good enough for his daughter. And then when he passed away, she actually refused to admit that he was dead and wouldn't let anyone take his body away for 3 days. And then when she finally did let them, take his body away, people were a little bit concerned, but kind of quickly forgot about it. And then later on, Homer Barron, he is a Yankee, shows up to work on sidewalks for the town, and he and Emily kind of start hanging out, and it causes a whole scandal because she's supposed to be more elite than that. But then suddenly Homer kind of disappears, and everyone assumes that he went back north. And then there's a weird smell at Emily's house, but they sprinkle lime around to get rid of the smell. So at the end of the story, when she dies, just of old age, the townspeople are finally able to get into her house, because she lived mostly as a recluse the final years of the majority of her life, actually. And they get into her bedroom, into this locked room, and discover there's a skeleton that is basically like embedded in the bed because it's been there rotting for so long. And on the pillow next to it is the indentation of a head, and there's gray hair on the pillow. It's very clear that Emily had been sleeping with this dead body, presumably Homer Barron, for quite a period of time. Tick is another short story by Joyce Carol Oates in our unit. And with Tick, we have a husband and a wife who's separated, and the wife, initially, it's told from the wife's perspective. Initially, she's very determined that she's going to be quite independent until she discovers a tick, a parasite, in her head, in her hair. And she immediately begins kind of panicking, and very quickly spirals mentally and emotionally. And then at the end of the story, her husband calls and says, and then she decides that they're going to get back together and they're going to have a baby. So very quick turn about for her in that story. With Famine, we have a woman who's 51 years old who grew up in Hong Kong and took care of her parents. She's very isolated, very sheltered. And at 51 years old, her parents passed away, and she decides she's going to get out of Hong Kong and she's going to go live this life that she's always wanted to live in New York. And so she goes to New York, and she eats these big, lavish, extravagant meals, some of them thousands of dollars a piece. But she's constantly haunted by memories of her parents and the lessons that she learned as a child, that she was constantly drilled in her head about the dangers of everyday life and the constant fear of famine and all of these precautions that her parents always took. And so even though she has physically escaped from the sort of repressed childhood that she lived, she can't mentally escape it. And at the end of the story, she has this sort of daydream dinner in her hotel room where all of these friends and family show up and wine and dine and have a great time with her. And even her parents show up in her dream, and they finally approve of what she's doing. And so even though we don't know what happens after this party, it kind of ends with that. We get that sense that this is sort of her way to bring about a little bit of closure with those feelings, potentially. With a soldier's home, we have a soldier named Krebs. He comes home late from war, or later than all the other soldiers from war. So when he gets back home, it kind of seems like nobody really wants to hear his stories. And he has a difficult time hanging out with everyone, and he feels very isolated. And alienated from everyone around him. And it's just sort of that, the idea of coming back home again, and how it's just not, it isn't what he left. And even though the place hasn't changed, he's changed very much from when he left there the first time. The Yellow Wallpaper is by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. The Yellow Wallpaper, I think, is a very interesting story, probably my favorite out of all of these. Charlotte Perkins Gilman actually wrote this story after being placed on the rest cure herself, and to try to help people understand more kind of psychologically what happens to you when you are in this sort of extremely isolated state. So in the Yellow Wallpaper, we have an unnamed narrator, and she's unnamed throughout the entire story, which if an author ever chooses to leave the main character without a name, that's significant. So she's placed in this, she and her husband rent a summer house, and she wants to sleep in this really pretty big, airy room downstairs, but he insists that they take a room upstairs, which unironically is the nursery. So look for the symbolism there. And the nursery is ugly. It has this horrid yellow wallpaper. If you remember, it has bars on the windows. There's even a gate at the top of the stairs. She's isolated, essentially imprisoned here. And the more time she spends in this room, kind of the more she declines mentally. The yellow wallpaper is really just getting under her skin and driving her kind of crazy. But then she decides she actually likes the wallpaper and that she thinks there's a woman behind it, and she's behind these bars, and she's going to get this woman out of this wallpaper. And the story just goes from there, where she's just tearing all of the wallpaper off the wall. And eventually, very near the end of the story, she flips from being herself to being the woman behind the wallpaper, who has now escaped. And at the end of the story, she's just kind of creeping or crawling around the room, and says that now she is the woman and that they'll never put her back again. It's a very interesting insight in that particular story. So for these stories, you need to think of 3 of them that you feel like you really understand. Obviously, they all have a plot, they all have setting, they all have characters. So really kind of coming up with that is not as difficult as coming up with a theme that can connect all 3 stories. So whenever so I think looking at the thesis statement handout will be really helpful with this. So the thesis statement handout, it's kind of long. It's got a lot of information in here if you want to read through all of it, a lot of different sample patterns that you can use. But essentially for your thesis statement, you need to mention all 3 titles or authors. You need to mention the literary technique that you're going to use, and then also mention your thematic topics. So I have a sample one on here. Gilman, Faulkner, and Chopin all use the setting of their respective stories to develop the theme of repression. So you could use the title of the stories if you wanted to. The short stories, The Yellow Wallpaper, A Rose for Emily, and The Story of an Hour all utilize setting to develop the theme of repression. So same idea, little different wording. You do not have to use my sample thesis as a sort of fill in the blank template for your own thesis statement, but you are more than welcome to. So once you decide those things, then it's really, you need to start thinking about how you're going to build your essay. Oh, and as far as the topic paper is concerned, all of these questions here, you don't have to answer all of these questions. These are questions really just to kind of like get your brain working, help you generate ideas and look at some specific elements within the story of, what you might want to talk about in relation to those different literary elements. Okay, so then let's talk briefly about the rubric. So if you look through here, we have all the requirements for the essay. The analysis there is 25%. You notice that you do need to have 3 examples or quotes in each body paragraph, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in my next video when we kind of break down the essay a little bit more. Organization is going to be 10%. That's 5-paragraph structure, introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. That you need to have a topic sentence and concluding sentence at the beginning and end of each body paragraph. Your coherence and unity is related to having a thesis and having transitions. And that type of thing. The thesis statement itself is worth an entire letter grade. So making sure that you have that thesis statement at the end of your introduction is really, really, really important. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next video, but we've already mentioned it a bit here. Grammar, major and minor errors are 20%. So I would recommend that you download Grammarly, that you install it as a Chrome extension or as an extension in whatever browser that you're using, and that you utilize Grammarly to check your essays, your discussion boards. Some of you have some surface errors in your discussion board that could definitely be avoided if you used Grammarly as an extension on your browser. So style is in there as well. That's college level diction, syntax, sentence patterns, making sure that you're writing in third person, that you're using standard academic English. You shouldn't have random acronyms, abbreviations. You shouldn't be using contractions. You shouldn't be using slang, text talk, that type of thing. Let's see, MLA formatting is included here, that you have your MLA format is correct, that you've got your works cited page, and that you've got your in-text citations. So that's really just an overview of the stories and of the essay requirements. I'm going to follow this up with another video where I'm going to share an outline and some more tips about writing the essay. So be sure to email me, contact me if you have any questions. If you want to set up a one-on-one meeting with me, you are more than welcome to do so. If you just email me, we can set up a Google Meet or a Zoom or something like that, so that if you have specific questions that you want answered, or you just need to talk through something, brainstorm something, bounce ideas off somebody, I'm here. Just let me know if you want to do that. Okay. Good luck with everything.